The hospital name tag on the marble counter already carried a blank space where the father's name should have been. Beside it, Camille Ashford's phone played 22 seconds of a recording sent from a number she had never seen before. "I'll deal with the hospital in the morning," Raphael said through the speaker. Behind him, a woman laughed softly, and Camille recognized Gianna Volpe's voice before the next contraction bent her over the counter. Her water had broken 7 minutes earlier. Her husband was not coming home, and by morning, she was the thing he planned to deal with. Camille saved the file to a folder with a password. Raphael did not know that choice ended the marriage before either of them said the word divorce. She called him back. He answered on the 5th ring, music and clinking glasses drifting behind his voice. "I'm with partners. My water broke. How far apart are they?" 4 minutes. Call your doctor." "I called you." A woman's voice asked whether he wanted another drink. Camille closed her eyes. "I'll send someone. I need my husband. Take the bag. Use the private entrance. Don't speak to anyone outside the medical staff." Even in labor, she heard the order underneath the concern. "You're with her, aren't you?" "Not tonight, Camille." That wasn't an answer. She hung up, and in the silence that followed, a smaller question began to grow. If this was a secret he had guarded so carefully, then who had sent her the recording? And why choose tonight, of all nights? Then came a knock at the door. If you want to know what happens to Camille next, leave a like so we know you're here. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of her journey. The door opened before Camille could place her hand on the knob. Augustin Renner stood there with a ring of keys still in one hand, one shoulder of his dark coat soaked through. He was 60 years old and walked with the slight limp of a man whose knees held grudges longer than his mind did. And he looked down at the spreading puddle beneath her feet before he looked at her face. Mr. Castellane said an ambulance was on its way. Camille gripped the edge of the table as the next contraction rose through her. "Is there one?" Augie was silent for exactly 1 beat. "No." He stepped inside, picked up the hospital bag that had been waiting beside the shoe cabinet for 3 weeks, and the phone in his coat pocket began to vibrate. He put it on speaker, perhaps because he needed both hands, perhaps for another reason Camille didn't understand then. Raphael's voice filled the kitchen, still as calm as if he were discussing a delivery schedule. "Leave her with the paramedics. When it's done, drive downtown. I have guests." Camille straightened. The pain blurred her vision for a second, but she heard every word clearly, and what sent the cold down her spine wasn't the order, it was the calmness. There wasn't the slightest urgency in his voice. Not a single question about her. Augie turned his body to block her view of the phone, as though the movement might shield her from some part of what she had just heard. The rear tires losing air. Silence came from the other end. Camille knew that silence. It was the sound of a man checking every number he had ever memorized. "You inspected it this afternoon. Chicago finds ways to break things after business hours." Another silence followed, longer this time. "Don't drive her yourself." Augie ended the call. He bent down, lifted the bag onto his shoulder, and Camille watched him for a long moment. "You just lied to a man who never forgets anything." He didn't look up. "I'm practicing a few new habits." A laugh escaped her, or something close to one, brief and broken in the middle. In the 6 years she had lived in that house, Camille had never heard him speak more than 10 sentences at once. He was the man who opened car doors, the man who stood 3 paces away, the man who nodded in greeting and then disappeared. She didn't know whether he had a family. She didn't know where he went after each shift. And yet tonight, the only person standing in her kitchen was him. The elevator descended more slowly than usual. Camille leaned against the metal wall, one arm around her belly while the other fumbled with her phone. She wanted to listen to the recording again. Not to make certain, but because some part of her still needed to hear it one more time before she could believe it. She opened the password-protected folder, tapped the file, and the signal dropped to 1 bar before disappearing entirely. The recording played for 22 seconds and then stopped. She dragged it back to the beginning. Still 22 seconds. The original message had been longer. She remembered clearly that it was still playing when the first contraction struck. But the saved copy only went as far as the other woman's laughter. The part after that, the part where Raphael continued speaking, hadn't finished uploading. Camille stared at the screen and saw something so familiar it made her nauseous. In her profession, they called it a minor discrepancy, a date copied incorrectly, a signature with a stroke out of place. a gap in the chain of ownership that no one bothered to question, harmless on its own. But every record was the same. All it took was one inconsistency, and everything that followed lost its value as proof. She had just created an inconsistency in the only evidence she possessed, with her own hands. The elevator doors opened onto the basement level. Cold air struck her face, and the next contraction arrived sooner than she had expected, strong enough that she had to clutch Augie's shoulder. He said nothing. He simply stood still and let her hold on, then guided her toward the car. He didn't open the rear door. He opened the front passenger door, and that was the first detail of the night that made her understand he was calculating something. The back seat was where the lady of the house sat. The front seat was where a companion sat. Camille lowered herself inside, and while she waited for him to walk around the hood, she saw it. A small, hardbound notebook was wedged between the dashboard and the air vent, open to the middle, its pages crowded with handwriting, dates along the left margin and times along the right. It wasn't a schedule book. Schedules were stored in the company system, where anyone could see them. This was the kind of thing people wrote down when they didn't want it kept in any system at all. Augie opened the driver's door and sat down, and his hand reached over to close the notebook faster than was natural. He slipped it into the door compartment with the practiced motion of someone who had done it thousands of times. Camille didn't ask. She remembered. It was the only thing she could still do well at that moment. The engine started. He backed out of the parking space, and on the console, the navigation screen lit up and went dark once, very quickly, as though someone far away had tested a key. Mr. Renner. He didn't turn toward her. Yes. If you take me tonight, you'll lose your job tomorrow. I know. Then why are you still doing it? The car climbed the ramp and emerged from the garage, and streetlights passed over his face in narrow bands. He waited until they had reached the main road before answering, his voice so even she nearly missed it. Because there was a night, a long time ago, when I did nothing at all. Camille turned to look at him. He offered no further explanation, and the next contraction came before she could ask. There was one blank on the admission form that Camille stared at longer than all the others. Emergency contact. She held the pen, and in those 4 seconds, she thought of her husband's name. Even pictured the way he would walk into the hospital room the next morning, wearing the expression of a man correcting an inconvenience. She wrote Augustin Renner. The admitting nurse asked no further questions. She simply slid the form into the chart and called for a wheelchair. Augie stopped at the painted line outside the maternity ward, still carrying the bag. I'll wait in the lobby. Camille meant to thank him, but the contraction struck, and all that escaped her mouth was a broken breath. He placed the bag on her lap. You take care of your part. Then the doors closed, and she went inside alone. The delivery room on the 7th floor was lit by white light so harsh that everything looked the same, and Camille began to count. It was a habit from her profession, something she did when there was nothing else she could control. The monitor beeped 4 times and paused, 4 times and paused. The ceiling panel had 12 ventilation holes. The door opened and closed 19 times in the first 40 minutes. She counted so she wouldn't think about the phone lying face down on the small table beside the bed, silent ever since she had ended the call in the kitchen. There were no messages, no missed calls. The man who had once remembered exactly how much sugar she took in her coffee, the man who had flown someone home from Milan simply because she mentioned a certain kind of pastry, couldn't send her a single word tonight. Close to 11 o'clock, the rhythm of the machine changed. Camille heard it before she saw the reaction on anyone's face. 4 beeps and a pause became 3 rapid beeps, then slowed, then quickened again. The nurse who had been talking to her about breathing stopped in the middle of a sentence, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped half an octave, calm in the way people became calm only when they had no choice. More people entered the room. Someone drew the curtain. Someone placed an oxygen mask over her face and told her to breathe deeply, and Camille obeyed while keeping her eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting the ventilation holes for the 8th time. One person told her not to push yet. 3 minutes later, someone else told her she had to push now. She didn't ask what was happening because she was afraid of the answer, and she didn't ask where her husband was because she already knew. 14 months earlier, she had left another hospital in silence. Raphael hadn't been there that day either, and afterward no one had explained anything more to her. She had learned that there were rooms people entered as 2 and left alone. So when every sound in the room suddenly stopped, Camille didn't close her eyes. She stared straight up at the ceiling and waited, and 3 seconds passed so slowly that she had time to complete a single thought, that if it happened again this time, she would never be able to stand up afterward. Then the cry came, strong, clear, furious, filling the room from one corner to the other. Camille heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize as her own. The nurse smiled, and that smile told her everything no one needed to say. A girl. They placed the baby on her chest, warm and heavier than she had imagined, and the child stopped crying almost at once. One tiny hand worked its way free of the blanket, touched Camille's index finger, then closed around it, tight, refusing to let go. Camille lowered her head and looked at those fingers, and she cried. But not because Raphael wasn't there, not because of the woman in the recording, not because of the apartment on Lakeshore or the accounts held in both their names. She cried because in that moment she understood something so simple it was cruel, that from this second forward, every decision in her life would have to begin with the same question. Is this good for her? Not is this fair to Camille, or easy, or less painful. Only that one question, and she would have to answer it every day for years to come, even on the days when she had no strength left. The night shift head nurse brought the identification bands close to 1 o'clock in the morning. A salt and pepper-haired woman who had worked nights long enough not to ask questions that didn't need asking. She placed the plastic card on the table and picked up a pen. The baby's name? Camille looked down at the wrinkled little face sleeping against her chest. She had already had a name, the one the two of them had chosen together on an evening in September, and now it sounded like the name of a stranger. Juniper. The nurse wrote it down. Then the pen stopped at the space for the surname. She didn't look up, but she didn't continue writing either. Camille could hear the machine in the room. 4 beeps and a pause, steady once more. Ashford. The pen moved again. The nurse fastened the band around the baby's tiny ankle, checked it once more, then placed the second identification card on the table beside the bed, the one meant for the mother's records. Camille picked it up after the nurse left the room. The baby's name, weight, time of birth, mother's name, and at the very bottom, a printed line with a long empty space, waiting to be filled in, the place reserved for the father's name. She held the card for a long time, then she placed it face down on the table and wrote nothing at all. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the recovery room on the 7th floor held nothing but the sound of the monitor and the breathing of the baby sleeping in the bassinet beside the bed. Camille woke not because of the pain, but because of an old habit, the habit of checking everything before the sun came up. She reached for her phone. There were 4 notifications, and not one of them was from her husband. The first was from the bank, and she read it 3 times before she understood. Access for the joint account holder had been restricted at the request of the primary account holder. She opened the application, entered her password, and the screen displayed a gray line across the place where the balance had once appeared. Debit card suspended, transfers suspended, balance inquiries suspended. Camille sat up slowly, one hand pressed against her incision, and something inside her mind began moving in a different direction. She didn't look for the appeal button. She didn't call customer service. 6 years of appraisal work had taught her that the most important thing in any record was never on the first page. It was in the activity log, in the lines showing who had touched what and when. She scrolled down, found the account activity history, and opened it. The list appeared in reverse order. The most recent transaction was the payment for maternity insurance. Above it was another entry, request to restrict joint account holder access. Authenticated with the primary account holder's electronic signature. 9:40 in the morning, Tuesday. Camille stared at those numbers, and the entire room suddenly fell silent. Her daughter had been born at midnight on Friday. This order had been signed 3 days earlier. 3 days before, her water broke in the kitchen. 3 days before, she heard 22 seconds of a recording from an unknown number. At 9:40 on Tuesday morning, she had been sitting in her obstetrician's office with one hand resting on her belly, listening to the doctor say that everything was fine. At that same moment, only a few blocks away, her husband had opened his laptop and cut her off from her own money. Camille lowered the phone onto the blanket and stared into the empty space above the bassinet. Since the night before, she had been telling herself a story, that Raphael had been caught, that he had panicked, that he had reacted the way unfaithful men always reacted when exposed, clumsy and cruel and impulsive. That story left room for forgiveness later. It left room for a weak man. But 9:40 on Tuesday morning wasn't panic. It was an item on a work schedule. Someone had sat down, opened a computer, and carried out the first step in a sequence with many more steps to follow. She picked up the phone again and dialed. He answered on the second ring, completely awake, with no music playing behind him anymore. Are you all right? You locked me out of the account. I didn't freeze it. I restricted it. There's a difference. Not at the checkout counter. A brief silence followed. She heard a glass being placed on a wooden surface. You've been through a long night. You're not in a condition to make financial decisions. I just gave birth. I haven't lost my mind. I didn't say that. You wrote it on a form and pressed send 3 days ago. This time the silence lasted longer, and Camille counted it. 4 beats, 5 beats. She had learned the night before that his silences contained more information than anything he said. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into the gentle tone he used with difficult business partners. Listen to me. There's already a private nurse at the house, working around the clock. The pediatrician will be there at 10 o'clock this morning, the best one in the city. I scheduled it last week. There are 2 men downstairs. You don't have to think about anything. You only have to come home. Camille sat still and listened until he finished. Last week. Those were the words that sent a chill down her spine. Not any of the others. An entire system of care had been built around her. Meticulous, expensive, perfect. And every part of it was paid for by him, reported to him, and knew where she was at every hour of the day. People didn't call that care. They called it a fence with a roof over it. Does your protection include the Wi-Fi password, or only the men standing in the hallway? He didn't laugh. Don't turn this into something it isn't. Then what is it? It's a husband wanting his wife and child home. Do you know she's a girl? The question fell into the middle of the call and stayed there. Camille hadn't meant to ask it. It had simply come out. And during the next 2 seconds, she clearly heard him inhale, the breath of a man who had just realized it had never occurred to him that he should ask. I'll be there at 7 o'clock. Don't. She ended the call before he could say anything else. Then she stood, gripping the bed rail, took 3 steps to the window, and pulled the curtain open slightly. The parking lot below was almost empty, the yellow lines glowing beneath the high security lights. A black sport utility vehicle moved slowly through the barrier, without using a turn signal, and without searching for a parking space. It circled the area once, then backed into a spot opposite the patient exit, its front facing outward. No one got out. The taillights went dark. Camille looked at the clock on the wall, 4:27 in the morning. There were still 2 hours and 33 minutes, until 7 o'clock. And his people were already there. The box wrapped in pale blue paper and tied with a white ribbon was placed on the table beside the bed at 9:15 in the morning, and the person who set it down was Gianna Volpe. She knocked twice, very softly, then came in without waiting for an answer, in the manner of someone accustomed to entering rooms that didn't belong to her. Camille. I'm so sorry Raphael couldn't be here. Camille pulled the blanket up to her waist and said nothing. She had been awake since 4 o'clock, and she knew what she looked like, but she also knew that of the 2 people in this room, she wasn't the one who had something to prove. Gianna stood 3 steps from the bed, exactly the distance of someone paying a visit out of courtesy. He was tied up all night. Something came up with the European shipment. He asked me to bring this for Junie. Camille heard the name fall into the middle of the room, and she didn't blink. Junie, not Juniper. Junie was what Raphael had said one evening in October, when he placed his hand on her belly and told her that 3 syllables were too long for a baby. She had laughed. She had told him it sounded like the name of a bakery. That conversation had taken place in the apartment kitchen, with no one else there, no one else listening. And from that day until now, she had never once spoken that shortened name outside those 4 walls. She had never texted it to anyone, never written it down. The baby was only 21 hours old, and the band around her ankle clearly read Juniper Ashford. Camille let the discrepancy remain where it was. In her profession, people never pointed out an error the moment they saw it. They recorded it, waited, and watched to see whether the other side would build anything else upon it. Thank you. Gianna nodded, her gaze moving briefly toward the bassinet before returning. Does she sleep well? She does. That's fortunate. The first night is usually very difficult. Do you have children? There was a pause so brief it wasn't enough to call hesitation. Not yet. My cousin has 3. Camille nodded. She adjusted the pillow behind her back, slowly, drawing out the movement just enough. Did he work very late last night? Very late. He stayed at the hotel until nearly dawn. The partners flew in from Zurich, so they had to work on their schedule. The answer came smoothly, complete, even furnished with a city. Camille hadn't mentioned a hotel. She had only said late. She looked down at her hands resting on the blanket and felt something very strange. Not anger, but a cold, sharpened calm. The feeling of someone who had just found the false line in a thick file and knew that everything from this point forward would become easier. He must be exhausted. He's worried about you. He should have worried at the right time. Gianna smiled, a smile measured with care. You're upset. I understand. Do you? Everyone feels this way after giving birth. Camille looked up and met her eyes. Miss Volpe, how long have you been the director of my husband's gallery? 4 years. In those 4 years, has he ever asked you to deliver a gift to anyone? Gianna didn't answer immediately. Raphael trusts me. I know. I only want to know how much he trusts you. No one raised her voice. Nothing broke. A nurse passed in the hallway pushing a medicine cart that rattled softly, and while the sound of the wheels faded, the two women looked at one another across the distance of 3 steps, and both understood that half the game had just been laid open without either of them having to name it. Gianna adjusted the strap of her handbag. He only wants his family safe. So do I. Then you should go home. Thank you for stopping by. You should leave now. Gianna faltered for half a second at the bluntness, then nodded and turned away. At the door, she paused and added, her voice much softer now, almost kind. She's beautiful. Then the door closed. Camille remained still for 30 seconds. She had won. She knew she had just won. She had caught 2 discrepancies in a conversation that lasted less than 6 minutes, and she hadn't revealed that she had caught either one. She leaned back against the pillow with the feeling that, for the first time in 24 hours, she still had control over something. Then her gaze fell upon the wall above the head of the bed. The care board hung there, the whiteboard every hospital room had, already filled in with blue marker. Room number. Name of the morning nurse. Time of the next feeding. And on the bottom line, the name of Juniper's attending pediatrician, written clearly in full. Camille stared at it, and the feeling of victory dissolved like ice in warm water. For the past 6 minutes, she had watched Gianna's face closely, every shift of muscle, every rhythm of response, searching for signs of deceit in her voice and in her smile. She had done everything correctly except one thing. She hadn't watched where Gianna's eyes went. The board was directly above Camille's left shoulder, perfectly visible to anyone standing 3 steps from the bed. 3 steps was the distance Gianna had chosen the moment she entered, and had never changed throughout the entire conversation. It wasn't the distance of courtesy. It was the distance from which someone could read. Camille closed her eyes for a moment. In her profession, what had just happened was called a minor discrepancy. Not a discrepancy in the record, a discrepancy in the appraiser. And when the appraiser was the one who strayed, the error never stopped with a single piece of paper. Camille pressed the call button for the nurse, and kept her finger on it longer than necessary. The head nurse for the morning shift came in 2 minutes later, and Camille spoke at once, her voice even, offering no explanation. I need the security code on my medical record changed. Don't give out any medical information over the phone, not even to someone claiming to be family. Don't allow any visitors into the room unless I confirm it directly and verbally with the person on duty. The nurse looked at her for a second, then took out a pen. Would you like to list the people who are permitted? There's one person, Augustin Renner. Only one? Only one. She wrote it down, then looked up, and her gaze stopped on the care board above Camille's left shoulder. Nothing more needed to be said. She took a cloth, erased the final line, removed both the pediatrician's name and the time of the next examination, then rewrote everything on a sheet of paper, folded it in half, and placed it directly into Camille's hand. From now on, this information will only be kept in the password-protected system. The board outside the room will show only the room number. Thank you. I've worked nights here for 11 years. She said it with her back already turned and added nothing else. But Camille understood what she meant. There were rooms a person needed to see only once to know what was happening inside them, even when no one told the story. At 10:15, Camille's phone vibrated with a message from Augie. 2 men in the main lobby. One named Delgado, a warehouse guard in Cicero. The other was Marek, a driver for Mr. Sartori. Both were on the family payroll, and neither was the kind of man sent to bring the boss's wife and child home. Camille read the message twice, then deleted it. She looked toward the bassinet. Juniper was asleep, both hands loosely curled beside her head, her chest rising and falling steadily beneath the swaddling blanket. Camille sat watching her for a long time, and the question she had asked herself at 1 o'clock in the morning returned unchanged. Is this good for her? If they stayed, there were doctors, medicine, people on duty through the night, and 2 men standing in the lobby waiting until the shift changed. If they left, there was none of that. She pressed the call button for the doctor. Before leaving the hospital, Juniper received one final, complete examination. Weight, temperature, breathing rate, sucking reflex, skin color, umbilical cord. The doctor listened to her heart for nearly a minute, then removed the stethoscope and nodded. She's healthy, completely normal. He signed the certification stating that her condition was stable, carefully explained that she needed a follow-up appointment within 72 hours, and gave Camille an instruction sheet for monitoring the baby, along with the number for the 24-hour pediatric hotline. The nurse swaddled Juniper properly, inspected the car seat, adjusted the straps, and pulled on them twice to test them. Remember to keep her neck and feet warm. Don't leave her in the car too long without someone sitting beside her. I won't. Then came the early discharge form. Camille read it from beginning to end, including the section accepting personal responsibility and the line stating that leaving before the recommended time was the patient's own decision. She picked up the pen. At the signature line, she paused for one beat. For 6 years, every document she had signed had carried the name Castellane: insurance contracts, apartment papers, building access cards, business cards, even the name on the mailbox. She put the pen to the page and wrote Camille Ashford. The final stroke trembled slightly, not from emotion, but because her hand was still weak. The nurse took the paper back, glanced at the signature, and asked no questions. Just before 11 o'clock, Camille checked the wallet inside the hospital bag. 3 $5 bills and 8 $1 bills, $23. In the compartment beside them were 2 cards, one for the joint bank account that had been locked, and one for her private account, opened when she was still working, where 3 years of untouched salary remained. She studied the second card for a long time, then pushed it to the bottom of the wallet. It wasn't because she had no money. It was because every card swipe created a line of data with a time, an address, and the name of the store. And in this city, Raphael could buy that line of data faster than she could withdraw the money. $23 in cash was the only thing in her wallet that didn't speak to anyone. Augie sent another message. The car was waiting by the receiving entrance on basement level 1, across from the freight elevator. The nurse brought in a wheelchair, and Camille sat down with Juniper in her arms. The baby remained asleep, never waking as they moved through the corridor, passed through 2 sets of secured doors, descended in the freight elevator, and emerged where the air smelled of damp cardboard and disinfectant. The car was already waiting, a different one from the night before. Augie opened the rear door, installed the infant seat, and personally checked the harness one more time, even though the nurse had already inspected it. Everything all right? Everything's all right. He closed the door, took the driver's seat, and the car began climbing the ramp. Camille sat beside her daughter with one hand resting on the edge of the infant seat, and she didn't turn to look back at the building behind them. Juniper slept soundly for the entire drive, unaware of everything, breathing steadily beneath the blanket, warm and safe, and that was the only thing that morning that happened exactly as it was supposed to. The car had been moving for 7 minutes, when the screen in the center of the dashboard lit up on its own. Camille had been looking out the window, counting streetlights, so she wouldn't have to think, and she turned only because the color of the light changed. A map appeared, showing a blue route that curved around downtown before heading north. The destination was displayed clearly across the top line. The house number on Lake Shore, their apartment. Did you just enter the address? Augie glanced down at the screen, and Camille saw both his hands tighten around the steering wheel for one beat before relaxing again. No. She looked back at the blue route. It was updating itself, recalculating the arrival time, suggesting which lane to use. No one was touching it. Then the speakers gave a brief chime, the sound of a call connecting, and Raphael's voice filled the entire car, so close that Camille felt as though he were sitting in the back seat. Don't turn around, Augie. I know who you're carrying. No one answered. Camille instinctively placed a hand over Juniper's ear, even though the baby was still asleep, and the voice was no louder than the engine. You've worked for me for 6 years. I paid your wife's hospital bills in 2019. I don't need to remind you of that, do I? Augie kept his eyes on the road. He didn't accelerate. He didn't change lanes. Not a single millimeter of his expression shifted. And that was what made Camille understand that he had considered this possibility before they ever left the hospital. Follow the route on the screen. Someone is waiting in the lobby. No one needs to make trouble for anyone. Then the call ended, not because Augie touched anything. The other side disconnected it. Camille sat motionless, and what chilled her wasn't the threat, because it wasn't a threat. It was an instruction, brief and polite, given to an employee who had failed to follow procedure. Raphael hadn't even bothered to speak to her. She was sitting in the car, and he knew she was there, and he still chose to address the driver. "Can he hear us?" "Possibly." Augie answered so quietly that his lips barely moved. "The car is registered to the company. Dispatch can push a route remotely. If they can push the route, they can activate the microphone." "Then, why don't you turn the engine off? Because right now they think we don't know." "Let them keep thinking that for a few more minutes." He maintained the same speed and followed the blue route exactly, turning right at the first intersection as the screen directed, then at the second, then the third. Camille counted every turn. 3 blocks. Something inside her chest was screaming that he was taking her back to the very place she had just escaped, but she said nothing, because one night and one morning had taught her that this man did everything more slowly than she expected. But he hadn't been wrong once. Halfway down the 4th block, while the screen displayed an arrow pointing straight ahead, Augie turned the wheel sharply to the right and sent the car down a narrow ramp into the basement of an office building. Fluorescent lights swept across the windshield in white bands. The navigation screen changed color at once and began chiming for a recalculated route, and Augie ignored it. He drove around the entire level, descended 1 floor farther, then pulled in between 2 concrete pillars and turned off the engine. Across the aisle, another car was already waiting, its doors unlocked. An older woman had just stepped out of the driver's seat, placed the keys beneath the floor mat, and walked directly toward the elevator without looking at them even once. "Who is she?" "Someone I know." "Does she know why we need to change cars?" "She knows I haven't asked anyone for anything in 30 years. That was enough to frighten her. They moved quickly. Augie released the infant seat from its anchors, carried the entire seat with Juniper still inside to the other car, installed it again, and checked the harness twice even though his hands were moving fast. The baby stirred once, then went back to sleep. Camille carried the bag and settled into the back seat beside her daughter. Before leaving the old car, Augie took out his phone, silenced it, placed it inside the glove compartment, and closed the door. "What are you doing?" "For the next 2 hours, they'll be chasing this." "What about mine?" "Turn it off. Don't put it on airplane mode. Shut it down completely." Camille picked up her phone. There were 4 missed calls on the lock screen, all from the same number. She held the power button until the screen went entirely black, and in the precise moment the device shut down, she felt something that was both loss and relief, the feeling of someone cutting the final rope that tied her to land. The new car started more quietly. Augie backed out, turned around, and began climbing the ramp. At that exact moment, headlights swept in from the garage entrance behind them. A black sport utility vehicle was descending, slowly, without signaling, moving in exactly the same way Camille had seen from the 7th floor window at 4:27 in the morning. It passed them on the ramp with less than 2 meters between the vehicles, and for 1 second the side windows were almost parallel. Camille didn't duck. She sat still, eyes forward, one hand resting on the edge of the infant seat, because ducking was what someone in hiding did, and a person in hiding was always easier to recognize than someone simply driving home. The black vehicle continued down to the lower level. Augie reached the street, merged into the midday traffic, and didn't release a long breath until they were 3 blocks away. "They'll find the other car in about 15 minutes. Then what? Then they'll find my phone inside it, and they'll spend another 2 hours convincing themselves I'm not stupid enough to have forgotten it." The apartment was on the 9th floor of an old building on the northwest side of the city, and it belonged to a former client of Camille's, a book collector in his 70s who was spending the winter in Arizona. 3 years earlier, she had handled all of his insurance paperwork after a burst pipe, and he had given her a spare key that both of them had forgotten was never returned. Inside, it was quiet, filled with books and dust. Augie checked every window, then went out to buy formula and diapers with cash. Camille placed Juniper in the middle of the large bed, arranged pillows around her, and the baby went on sleeping as though none of that morning had ever happened. There was an old laptop in the study. Camille turned it on, waited nearly 2 minutes for it to start, then connected to the home network and created a new email address. She typed the recipient's name from memory. Priya Ramanathan, an attorney she had worked with 3 years earlier during an insurance dispute involving forged paintings. The only woman in the conference room that day who hadn't been afraid of anyone. Camille kept the message brief. I need legal protection for myself and my newborn daughter. My husband has restricted access to our account, remotely controlled the car I was riding in, and sent men to watch me at the hospital. He hasn't filed any legal action. Please reply privately. She pressed send and sat staring at the screen. 40 seconds later, the prepaid phone Augie had bought along the way began to ring. Camille Ashford? Yes. Disconnect the Wi-Fi now. Camille lunged across the desk, pulled the router's plug, and didn't ask her question until every indicator light had gone dark. How did you get this number? I didn't. I called the number you put at the end of the email. Listen carefully. You just created a new email address through a network registered to someone whose client file is stored on the servers of the company where you used to work. Your husband can buy that information within 4 hours. You just pasted your address across your forehead. Camille sat down on the edge of the chair. There was a rule in her profession that she had taught to 3 new employees, that the most dangerous mistakes didn't come from what people didn't know, but from trusting a familiar process in circumstances that were no longer familiar. She had entered that Wi-Fi password dozens of times over the past 3 years without ever having to think. A minor discrepancy. And this time the discrepancy wasn't on paper. It was at the door, 4 meters from where her daughter was sleeping. I understand. Good. From now on, use only the cellular data on that prepaid phone. Don't turn the Wi-Fi back on. Don't connect any device to any network. All right. Now tell me the first thing you're thinking. I'm thinking about calling the police. Priya was silent for exactly 1 beat. I thought so. Listen, the Castellane family funds 2 support foundations for police families in this city, and both names are displayed on donor recognition boards. Your husband's transportation company provided free vehicles for 3 community events held by local precincts last year. Do you understand what that means? That the police are on his side. No, that's what people usually think. And it's wrong. Most police officers here are decent people doing decent work. The problem is that out of the 30 people who might hear where you are, I don't know who the 31st person will be. Neither do you. And you only have to be wrong once. Camille looked into the dark hallway, toward the partly open bedroom door. Then where do I go? You stay where you are tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'll move you somewhere else. No lease, no smart devices, and your name nowhere. While you wait, write down everything that happened in exact chronological order. No speculation. Nothing added or left out. Times accurate to the minute, if you can remember them. Have I done anything illegal? Taking the baby with me, I mean. You're her mother, and there's no custody order in place. You haven't broken the law, but you also can't disappear. Because disappearing is the one thing he needs in order to build his version of the story. I'll notify his attorney that the baby is safe and healthy, without telling them where you are. Camille was about to say thank you when Priya continued, her voice shifting into something flatter, the tone people used when setting a heavy object on a table and stepping away from it. And before you start thinking about knocking on the door of a federal agency, there's something you need to know. Your signature appears on 21 sets of his documents. We'll discuss that later. Camille opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She heard the heater knocking inside the wall, heard traffic moving on the street below, and somewhere deep in her memory came the image of blue folders stacked across her desk 3 years earlier, and Raphael's voice saying that it was only an internal formality. Just sign it and get it done. Miss Ramanathan. Tomorrow. Just tell me one thing. What does he want? Priya answered without hesitation. He doesn't need you dead, Camille. Dead people become victims, and victims bring investigations. He needs you alive. Alive, with no one believing a word you say. Augie returned close to 7 o'clock that evening, with a paper bag holding formula, diapers, and 2 takeout containers, and his right hand was wrapped in bandages from the knuckles to the wrist. He set the bag on the kitchen table with his left hand. Camille looked at the bandage, looked at the way he kept that arm drawn slightly toward his body, and she didn't ask. 6 years in that house had taught her that some questions, once asked, forced people to lie. He offered no explanation either. They both knew what the flat tire from the night before had cost, and they both left it where it was. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. 3 times, slowly, each ring evenly spaced. Camille was feeding Juniper, and she froze in the middle of the room. No one knew she was here. Priya had said they wouldn't move her until the next morning. The bell rang again, still 3 times, still just as slowly, and then a man's voice came through the hallway, even and polite. "Delivery for Miss Castellane." Camille carried the baby backward until her shoulders touched the kitchen wall. Augie had already reached the door, his left hand holding a paring knife, one eye pressed to the peephole. He stood there without moving. The footsteps outside stopped. Then the sentence came again. No louder, no more impatient, spoken in exactly the same tone as before, like a recorded line being played back. "Delivery for Miss Castellane." Camille heard her heartbeat inside her ears. Not because someone was standing outside the door, because of the name. Since noon the day before, every document she had signed had carried the surname Ashford. The man in the hallway was calling her by a name she had just abandoned, and he wanted her to understand that leaving it behind meant nothing. The elevator opened. A few footsteps followed. A low voice said something she couldn't make out. Then the elevator doors closed, and the hallway went silent. Augie remained exactly where he was for 1 full minute, counting silently, before unlocking the door. No one was outside. On the floor, directly in front of the doorway, sat a medium-sized cardboard box. He lifted it with 2 fingers of his uninjured hand and carried it into the kitchen. Camille placed Juniper on the bed, then came back out. There's no tape, no shipping label. He turned the box around once. No barcode, no sender's name, no logo, not even a single handwritten word. Just a plain box. Augie opened the lid with the point of the knife, very slowly, and both of them instinctively stepped back half a pace. Nothing inside made a sound. There was no ringing phone, no device, no wire, nothing a technician could dismantle, label, and seal inside an evidence bag. There was only a sheet of photographic paper, 20 by 25 centimeters, placed face down. Camille turned it over. The photograph was of her. She was sitting on the long stone bench beside the entrance to the hospital emergency department, both arms wrapped around herself, her hair tied back carelessly, wearing the gray coat she had borrowed from a nurse. The picture had been taken from above, probably from the 3rd or 4th floor of the building across the street, clear enough to show the folds in her sleeves, clear enough to show that she was looking down at the phone in her hands. She remembered that moment. A few minutes before 5 o'clock in the morning, she had gone downstairs for exactly 15 minutes to breathe, after discovering that the order restricting her account had been signed 3 days earlier, and she had sat there alone because she wanted to cry somewhere no one could see her. There had been no one on the sidewalk that morning. She had checked. She always checked. There was no note inside the box. Nothing written on the back. Camille set the photograph on the table and understood at once that this was the most subtle thing that had happened in the past 36 hours. A tracking device could be taken to court. A threatening message could be printed. A photograph proved nothing at all, except that at the hour when she believed she was alone, she hadn't been alone, and the person watching had been patient enough to wait until today to show her. The prepaid phone vibrated. Raphael's private number. Camille watched it ring 3 times, then turned on the recorder and answered. "Is that you?" "Yes." His voice was gentle and tired, exactly the voice he used when he wanted the other person to feel guilty. "I couldn't sleep." "How's the baby?" "She's fine." "I need to ask you for something. Take a picture of the discharge examination records and send them to me. I want my doctor to look them over, just for reassurance. The hospital already performed a complete examination." "I know. I only want a second person to read them." "Which second person?" "You know. The one I scheduled last week." Camille looked at the photograph on the table. "How do you know the name of the baby's pediatrician?" Silence. Half a second. No more than that. But Camille had spent 6 years in her profession learning how to listen to the empty spaces in a record, and she knew exactly what that half-second contained. It wasn't confusion. It was the time a person needed to decide what kind of lie to tell. "The hospital notified me. The hospital locked the records yesterday afternoon. They aren't giving information over the phone to anyone." "Camille." The doctor's name was written in only one place in the entire hospital, on the board above my bed, and during the entire time it was there, only one person from outside came into the room. He didn't answer that. His voice changed, and this was the part Camille had been waiting for. "Come home. Come back before this becomes public." She stood still in someone else's kitchen, the phone still in her hand, and she heard clearly what had just happened. During the entire call, he hadn't asked how much the baby weighed. He hadn't asked whether she was feeding properly. He hadn't asked whether Camille was in pain, whether she had a fever, whether she had been able to sleep. He had asked about paperwork, and he was worried about this becoming public. Not worried about her, not worried about their child, worried about his reputation. Mr. Castellane. What? Who was standing on the third floor of the building across from the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning? This time, the silence lasted much longer. And when he finally spoke, Camille heard something in her husband's voice that she had never heard once in their 6 years together. Not anger, not confusion. What are you talking about? It was ignorance. She ended the call. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the prepaid phone began vibrating on the kitchen table and wouldn't stop. Camille had put Juniper down only 20 minutes earlier. She answered in the dark. Are you sitting down? Priya asked. And those were her first words. No greeting, no apology for the hour. I am. He filed at 11:40 tonight. A petition for emergency custody and an order preventing the baby from being taken out of state. The hearing is set for 10 o'clock this morning. Camille looked toward the dark window. What is he accusing me of? 2 things. First, that you removed a newborn from the hospital against the father's wishes and against medical advice. Second, Priya paused for half a beat. Second, that you're suffering from a severe postpartum psychiatric disorder, showing signs of persecutory delusions and incapable of caring for your child. Camille said nothing. She had expected this from the moment she heard him tell her to come home before the matter became public. But knowing a blow was coming didn't make it hurt less. The petition includes a physician's affidavit, Priya continued, a licensed psychiatrist with a practice in River North. He states that you display delusional thinking, severe emotional instability, and behavior consistent with acute postpartum psychosis. I've never met anyone like that. The affidavit was signed at 2:15 yesterday afternoon, exactly 2 hours after you left the hospital. Then it's false. That's what I intend to prove within 15 minutes. Stay by the phone. Priya hung up. Camille sat in the dark kitchen with both hands resting on the table, thinking the first thing anyone in appraisal work would think. A false affidavit was the easiest thing in the world to destroy. Call the clinic, confirm there had been no appointment, confirm there was no patient record, and the entire petition would collapse along with the credibility of the person who filed it. She almost felt relieved. 40 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. Camille knew from Priya's first breath that something was wrong. Priya, the record is real. Camille stood up. What record is real? I called the clinic through its overnight line and requested emergency verification under procedure. They searched your name in the system. There was a result. A patient named Camille Ashford. Matching date of birth, matching insurance number, matching former address. 1 completed appointment. That's impossible. 6 weeks before you gave birth. Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. There's an intake form. There are 2 pages of handwritten clinical notes from the doctor. There's a diagnostic code. There's a paid invoice charged to the insurance card in your name. There's even your signature on the consent to treatment. Camille leaned back against the kitchen cabinet. I've never set foot in that place. I believe you. The problem is that I'm not the person you need to convince. That signature isn't mine. A signature can be examined, but that takes 4 weeks, and the hearing is in 7 hours. Camille closed her eyes and began doing the only thing she knew how to do. She turned the record over in her mind, not searching for the truth, but searching for the discrepancy. Then who went there that day? A woman carrying your insurance card and your identification, who knew your date of birth and your former address. The clinic had no reason to suspect anything. 6 weeks before I gave birth means I was 8 months pregnant. The other woman would have had to look pregnant, or the receptionist would have questioned it. Correct. The doctor's notes include the gestational age. Camille opened her eyes. Listen to me. That wasn't fabricated overnight. My insurance card was in my wallet. I never lost it. That means someone copied it and made a duplicate. It means this was prepared at least 6 weeks before I gave birth. Before the account restriction order 3 days before the birth. Yes. Both women fell silent. Outside, a car passed, and its headlights swept across the kitchen ceiling before disappearing. Priya, I have to prove I wasn't somewhere I've never been. I can't even remember where I was on a Thursday afternoon 6 weeks ago. Probably at home. Alone. No one saw me. That's exactly what they calculated. A woman who is 8 months pregnant spends most afternoons at home alone, and has no alibi for any of them. Camille walked around the kitchen table 3 times. She thought of the credit card, now locked. The phone, now switched off and possibly compromised. The building access card, controlled by Raphael's company. The cameras in the apartment lobby, controlled by the same people. Every system that could prove where she had been that Thursday afternoon was in the hands of the man suing her. 40 minutes passed that way. 2 women speaking over the phone, trying one door after another and finding every one of them locked. Then Priya suddenly stopped in the middle of a sentence. Wait. What? They could erase medical records. They could create an intake form. They could fabricate an invoice, notes, and a signature. All of those things are stored in the clinic's system, and someone had access to that system. Yes, but that clinic is inside a multi-story medical building, and the common hallway doesn't belong to the clinic. Camille stopped in the middle of the kitchen. The hallway cameras. The hallway cameras belong to the building management company. They aren't medical records, so no one would think they needed to be dealt with. And footage is usually kept for 8 weeks. 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Priya said. And for the first time during the entire call, her voice changed. Still within the retention period. I need the exact time shown on the intake form. Then you're going to sleep for 2 hours. Be at my office at 7 o'clock in the morning. Don't travel in any vehicle whose owner's name appears on any document. At 7:15 in the morning, the small conference room inside Priya Ramanathan's office on Wacker held only 3 people and a laptop placed in the center of the table. Priya sat at the head with 2 phones beside her, one of them still connected and waiting. The manager of the medical building had agreed to release the footage after hearing the words, "court order," and the file arrived at 7:22. Camille placed Juniper in the infant carrier beside her feet, the baby full and asleep, then pulled the screen toward herself. The footage lasted 9 seconds. The camera was mounted in the corner of the 4th-floor hallway ceiling, aimed down toward the row of clinic doors, black and white, 25 frames per second. At the second, a woman entered the frame from the direction of the elevator. Camille watched, and the skin across her scalp went cold. The woman wore a gray wool coat that fell below the knees, with a folded collar and a belt tied around the waist, exactly the style Camille had worn throughout that winter. Her hair was tied low at the nape, slightly off-center to the left, exactly the way Camille tied it every morning because she was right-handed and could never make it perfectly straight. A soft leather bag with a long strap hung from her shoulder, the same kind Camille had carried to work for 3 years. The woman's belly curved visibly beneath the coat, the right size for the 8th month of pregnancy. Even the way she walked was the same, slow, leaning slightly backward, one hand supporting the underside of her belly. "That isn't me," Camille said. "I know," Priya replied. "The problem is that the judge doesn't know yet. Play it again." They watched it a second time, then a third, then a fourth. The woman moved from left to right, stopped outside the door, marked 402, reached out to push it open, and disappeared from the frame at the 9th second. Not once did her face turn upward. It wasn't accidental. She knew where the camera was, and kept her chin lowered just enough throughout all 9 seconds, maintaining an angle so steady it could only have been practiced beforehand. On the 5th viewing, Camille paused the recording at the 6th second. "Look at this." On the wall, directly to the left of the clinic doorway, there was a vertical strip of paper printed with height markings, the kind pediatric clinics used when children stood to be measured, numbered from 80 centimeters to 1.90 meters. The woman was passing directly beside it. Priya pulled her chair closer. Camille enlarged the frame, adjusted the brightness, and read the number aligned with the top of the woman's head. 1.72 meters, she said, including the shoes. Priya looked at her. "How tall are you?" 1.63 meters. "In the flat shoes I wore that day, no more than 1.65 meters. No one in the room spoke. 7 centimeters. In a still photograph, 7 centimeters meant nothing. 2 people viewed separately could look exactly alike, but placed beside a measurement scale printed on the wall, 7 centimeters became a number, and a number could be taken into court. "All right," Priya said, and began typing. "This is what we need. I'll request the original file from building management with a hash value and a chain of custody certification. No cutting, no editing, and we won't submit the version we enlarged ourselves." Camille didn't answer. She was still staring at the screen. "Camille? It isn't Gianna." Priya looked up. "Are you certain?" "Certain. Gianna Volpe is shorter than I am. I stood beside her at every gallery event for 3 years, And whenever we took a photograph together, she always stepped onto a level one step higher. She's about 1.58 meters. Priya set down her pen. Then there's a third person. Camille played the footage again, moving through it one frame at a time. She was no longer searching for the face. She was searching for other things. The things she had spent 6 years learning how to see. The coat was the right style, but the buttons were fastened one row off because the wearer wasn't familiar with it. The bag was the right kind, but it was still new, with no crease at the bottom, while Camille's had long been worn at the right corner, because that was always the side she set down first. The hair was tied with the correct slant, but held with a plain elastic, while Camille always used a fabric tie because her hair was fine. Every detail was correct enough for an outsider to believe, and wrong enough that only she would know. No one could recreate a person at this level from a single photograph. To reproduce someone this precisely, they would have had to watch that person move again and again, on many different occasions, long enough to learn which side she tied her hair toward, long enough to know which shoulder carried her bag, long enough to notice that she walked more slowly on an incline. For weeks, perhaps for months, someone had stood somewhere and watched her for all that time, taking notes, practicing, buying the exact coat and the exact bag, then fastening on a false belly, walking into a clinic, and signing Camille's name on a consent form. Camille sat in front of the screen for a long time. Priya allowed her to sit. She wasn't afraid. That was the strange part. During the past 36 hours, she had been afraid in every possible way. Afraid in the kitchen, afraid in the hospital elevator, afraid when the doorbell rang 3 times. But not now. What she felt was complete wakefulness, cold and clean, like opening a file she believed contained a single error, and discovering that the entire record had been constructed from the beginning by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Throughout those 36 hours, she had continued thinking of this as a marriage falling apart. A man involved with another woman, a cruel man, a man afraid of losing face, a matter between husband and wife. But a woman wearing a false pregnancy belly wasn't a matter between husband and wife. The order signed at 9:40 on Tuesday morning wasn't a matter between husband and wife. The photograph taken from the 3rd floor at 5 o'clock in the morning wasn't a matter between husband and wife. This was a process. Someone had planned it. Someone had carried it out. Someone had paid for it. And all of it had been operating for at least 6 weeks before the night she heard 22 seconds of a recording. Miss Ramanathan. Yes. My husband doesn't know who took the photograph at the hospital. I asked him last night, and he truly didn't know. Priya looked at her for a long time. You're telling me that more than one person is doing this. I'm telling you that the woman in this footage has never appeared in a single family photograph during the 6 years I lived there. I remember all their faces. She isn't one of them. Priya closed the laptop. Then the question is no longer what your husband wants. No, Camille said. The question is who hired her. At 5 minutes to 10, Priya propped the laptop on top of a stack of case files, so the camera sat level with Camille's eyes, then turned the screen toward the plain white wall of the conference room. There's nothing behind you. No windows, no paintings, no signs. Anyone who watches this recording later mustn't be able to tell which building you're in. Camille borrowed a dark blue blouse hanging in the office closet and tied her hair back again. Juniper was in the next room with a licensed pediatric nurse. Priya had called in at 6 o'clock that morning. Listen carefully. Answer only the question you're asked. Don't explain. Don't add anything. Don't guess. If I touch your hand, stop, even if you're in the middle of a sentence. All right. The judge appeared first. A woman around 60, with a dry, brisk voice. Then the frame on the other side opened, and Camille saw Sterling Vance seated before a row of law books, his silver hair neatly combed, a black pen placed parallel to the stack of papers in front of him. Raphael sat beside him. He wore a dark suit, was clean-shaven, and looked tired in an expensive way, the kind of exhaustion arranged so that anyone looking in would see a husband who had spent the night awake with worry. Camille, he said softly. Priya muted the microphone. Don't answer him unless the judge asks you to. Vance began immediately. He spoke for 11 straight minutes without stumbling over a single word. His client only wanted to find his son, he said, then corrected himself to daughter and apologized for the mistake with the expression of a man who had dropped a handkerchief. His client had arranged nurses, doctors, every possible condition for the finest care. The mother, meanwhile, had left the hospital through a freight entrance, signed an early discharge form under a different surname, turned off her phone, cut off all contact, and was now keeping the child at an undisclosed location. He read from the psychiatrist's affidavit slowly, one phrase at a time. Persecutory delusions, emotional instability, lack of capacity. Your Honor, we aren't alleging that Mrs. Castellane is acting maliciously. We believe she is ill. The judge turned to Camille. Mrs. Ashford, why did you leave the hospital early? Because 2 men were waiting in the main lobby. Both worked for my husband's company, and neither of them had any responsibility for bringing his wife and child home. What basis do you have for that statement? The family's private driver recognized them. One was a warehouse guard in Cicero. The other drove for Mr. Bruno Sartori. Anything else? Our joint account was locked while I was in recovery, and a woman connected to my husband entered my hospital room and stood at the exact distance needed to read the pediatrician's name on the care board. The following night, my husband called and repeated that name. Vance cut in. Your Honor, this is precisely the kind of thinking described in the affidavit. I have a recording of that call, Camille said, and the vehicle log shows that the car's route was changed remotely while I was inside it. Priya touched her wrist, half a second too late. Camille heard her own words echo back inside her mind, and knew at once what she had done. In the frame across from her, Vance's pen stopped moving. Raphael didn't shift, but his eyes moved once to the left, toward his attorney, and Camille understood that from this moment forward, they knew exactly what she had in her possession. The vehicle logs were stored on the company server, and the company server belonged to them. A minor discrepancy. Not on paper. In her own mouth. Priya didn't hesitate for even half a beat. She unmuted the microphone and continued as though the sentence had been part of the plan all along. Your Honor, because the petitioner has now been made aware of the existence of vehicle logs and related access data, we request an immediate preservation order covering all Castellane logistics servers and affiliated gallery systems, all company-issued phones, entry logs for the Cicero warehouse, vehicle location data, and all security footage from those facilities, for the period beginning 60 days before the birth and continuing through the present. Vance's head snapped up. That request is absurdly broad. It became necessary when your client filed an affidavit from a physician who never examined mine. That doctor has a complete record. Yes, Priya said. We also believe he has a complete record. Your Honor, permission to share the screen. The 9-second recording played across the divided screen. The woman in the gray wool coat entered the frame, walked beside the wall, kept her chin lowered, pushed open the clinic door, and disappeared. Priya played it again and paused at the 6th second, where the height chart ran vertically beside the doorway. This is the 4th-floor hallway of the medical building. The original footage was supplied by building management with a hash value and a certified chain of custody. The person shown is 1.72 meters tall, including her shoes. My client is 1.63 meters. On that date, she was 8 months pregnant and wasn't present in this building. No one in the other frame spoke. Vance looked down at his papers and didn't turn the page. Raphael, who had spent the past hour staring directly into the camera with the expression of a patient husband, turned his head to the right, looked beyond the edge of the frame, and remained that way. The judge asked the hospital's attorney to verify the information by phone. She listened for 2 minutes, took notes, then removed her glasses. The petition for emergency custody is denied. The medical record shows that the child is healthy, received a full examination before discharge, and is being properly cared for. Temporary physical custody remains with the mother, subject to periodic welfare checks. The preservation order is granted within the scope requested by the respondent. Mr. Vance, I want that physician sitting before me within 10 days. The connection on the other side remained open for several more seconds. Raphael turned back and looked directly into the camera, and this time Camille didn't look away. This isn't over. The screen went dark. Priya closed the laptop and pushed it aside. You just won. I just revealed too much. You did both. Remember what that feels like. It'll keep you more careful than any advice I could give you. She stood and reached for her coat. Now listen closely. The court has protected your rights. It hasn't protected your address. We're moving you in 40 minutes. At 7 o'clock the next morning, inside the new apartment in Rogers Park, a place with no lease in anyone's name, no connected devices, not even a smart speaker, Priya placed her phone face down on the table, then turned the screen upward. The headline had appeared across a local news site at 6:40. Mafia boss's wife flees with newborn amid mental health concerns. Beneath it was Camille's hospital photograph. the identification picture attached to her admission record, something that existed in only 2 places in the world, the hospital system and the packet Vance had submitted to the court. The hospital didn't leak this, Priya said. If medical records get out, they lose their license. This was an attachment to the petition, meaning it came from Vance's office, meaning it came from someone inside Vance's office. She captured the entire page, including the timestamp and the author's name. Do you know why he did this immediately after losing in court? Because he doesn't need to win in court. He needs 300,000 people to have already read that you're delusional by the time you say anything at all. Record the date and time. 6 months from now, this will have a different name in a federal case file. Camille read the entire article. Not one sentence was technically untrue. She had left the hospital early. She had signed with her maiden name. A medical affidavit had been submitted to the court. They had placed those truths beside one another in precisely the order required to construct a woman Camille didn't recognize. She closed the phone and went to prepare formula for Juniper, because that was what needed to be done at 7:15, and because she had learned that if she remained standing there reading, the entire morning would pass without anything being accomplished. At 9 o'clock, the prepaid phone alerted her to a message in the new email account, the account only 4 people knew about. The sender was a meaningless string of characters from a free domain. No subject, not a single word in the body. Only an image file. Camille opened it. The photograph had been taken at night, poor in quality, probably through a car window with a phone. It showed the metal door of a warehouse, a yellow light above it, and a brick wall on the left. Gianna Volpe stood in the frame wearing a dark coat, just stepping out through the doorway, one hand pushing the door closed behind her. Her other arm held a rigid document case against her chest. In the lower right corner was an automatic timestamp, 4:12 in the morning. The date shown was the day Juniper was born. Camille enlarged the image. The address on the small sign beside the door was in the Cicero Industrial District. She enlarged it again, this time focusing on the document case, on the outward-facing spine where a white label had been attached. 3 letters followed by 2 numbers. She placed the phone on the table and sat without moving. Priya looked at her. You recognize something. I recognize the label. Which label? The one I created. Camille stood, walked to the window, then turned back. 3 years ago, when I was still working for the art insurance company, Raphael asked me to review a batch of provenance certificates. He said it was an internal formality, that the gallery needed to standardize the records for shipping. 21 sets. I assigned them a code the way I coded every batch of documents, using the first 3 letters of the English word provenance, followed by the number of records. And the label on that document case. It's my code. The handwriting on the label is mine too. I attached those labels myself at my desk on an afternoon in April. Priya pulled out a chair and sat down. Keep going. I asked questions at the time. I asked why the ownership histories of those paintings contained such long gaps. I asked why 3 different shipping companies used the same billing address. He told me they were subsidiaries, and said that if the work made me uncomfortable, he would give it to someone else. She fell silent for a moment. I stopped being uncomfortable. I finished signing them and returned them. Camille turned back toward the photograph on the table. For the past 36 hours, what had hurt her was the 22-second recording, the sound of another woman laughing behind her husband's voice, the name Junie spoken from someone else's mouth. The affair had humiliated her, and humiliation was something she could endure. She had endured it since the first night, but the document case in Gianna's arms at 4:12 in the morning was different. It didn't humiliate her. It frightened her, because humiliation belonged to her alone, while those 21 sets of provenance certificates carried her signature on the back of every page, and in any investigation in the world, signatures were the first thing people searched for. Priya spoke very softly. Where are they now? Camille didn't answer immediately. She was calculating, and she calculated slowly, checking every step the way she would check a chain of ownership. I returned the originals to him. But the company I worked for had an archival retention policy. Every set of certificates handled by an appraiser had to be preserved as a certified copy in physical storage for at least 7 years. Paper copies. Not scanned, not uploaded, not stored on any server, because art insurance regulations prohibited digitizing provenance certificates due to the risk of forgery. Priya's head lifted sharply. You're telling me there are 21 sets of records sitting in a paper archive somewhere in this city, untouched for 3 years. In the basement of a building in South Loop, Inside cardboard boxes with my code written on the side. He doesn't know? He knows my company has an archive. He simply never thought about it, because to him, paper is something that belongs to the past. He can erase servers, buy employees, burn ledgers inside his own safe. No one thinks to bribe a basement full of cardboard boxes belonging to an insurance company they have never worked with. Camille picked up the photograph again and looked at the white label on the spine of the document case. Her own handwriting captured from 20 meters away at 4 o'clock in the morning by someone whose identity she didn't know. There is exactly one person in the world who still remembers those 21 boxes exist, Miss Ramanathan. And that person has just been described to this entire city as delusional. The recorder was placed in the exact center of the steel table, and Nadia Ilves pushed it another 2 centimeters toward Camille. Just enough for all 3 people in the room to see the red light. The conference room on the 11th floor of the federal building in the South Dearborn district had gray walls, 1 narrow window, and no water. You understand that this interview is voluntary? Yes. And you understand that cooperating doesn't mean you'll be granted immunity? Yes. Nadia opened the movie file. She was somewhere in her late 40s, with short hair, and she didn't begin with a single kind word. She didn't ask after the baby. She didn't say she was sorry for the circumstances. Your name appears on 21 sets of provenance certificates submitted by Castellane Gallery with shipping records 3 years ago. I know. The 3 shipping companies listed in those records shared the same billing address in Cicero. You were the appraiser. You saw that. I did. Then why didn't you ask? Camille placed both hands on the table. I did ask. I asked him twice. The first time, he said they were subsidiaries under the same accounting group. The second time, he said that if it bothered me, he would give the batch to someone else. And then I stopped asking. Why? Because every time I asked, there would be an argument in the house that night, and every argument ended with me being the one who apologized. Camille looked directly at the recorder. That was cowardice. You don't need to soften the wording. I know what it was. Nadia wrote down 1 line without looking up. Cowardice isn't a crime. We'll determine the rest. Augie was brought in at 11 o'clock. He sat without removing his coat, his right hand still bandaged, and answered the first question before Nadia had even finished asking it. Have you ever transported cash for Raphael Castellane? Yes. How many times? 14 times. Over 6 years. You knew that was illegal. I knew it wasn't wages. Camille turned to look at him. 14 times. He didn't avoid her eyes. Yes. You carried money for him 14 times, then stood in my kitchen that night and let me believe you were only a driver. I've stood in many rooms and let people believe that. Camille pushed her chair back and stood. She walked into the hallway, closed the door behind her, and leaned against the cold wall outside. Priya followed 30 seconds later. You left before he finished speaking. He carried money for him 14 times. Yes, and he was also the only person in 6 years who stood on your side once, on the exact night you needed someone to. Priya folded her arms. You're an appraiser. Have you ever closed a file halfway through because there was a stain on the first page? Camille pressed her palm against the wall and exhaled. She understood what she had just done. Anger had closed the door before the useful part of the truth could leave the room. In her profession, they called that a minor discrepancy. Not in the record, but in the person reading it. And it always cost more than any other mistake. Take me back inside. Augie was still sitting in the same chair. Camille pulled hers out and sat across from him. Tell us the part you didn't get to finish. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat with his left hand, took out a small memory card wrapped in a paper napkin, and placed it on the steel table. It made a dry clicking sound. That contains 14 months of travel logs, dates, times, pickup locations, drop-off locations, the amount of time spent at each place, and the license plates of the accompanying vehicles. I wrote everything by hand in a notebook first. At the end of each week, I typed it into the computer at home and copied it onto this. Nadia didn't touch it. Why did you keep records? Augie remained silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice as even as it always was, and that steadiness made the words harder to hear. 14 months ago, I drove him to Mercy Hospital. This lady, he tilted his chin slightly toward Camille without looking at her, was inside. She lost their first child that night. Camille felt the entire room shift slightly. We arrived at 10:20 in the evening. I parked in the visitor lane, 40 meters from the entrance. He didn't get out of the car. No one said anything. I sat there. He sat there. He took 2 phone calls. One about a shipment in Rotterdam, and another I couldn't hear clearly. At one point, he put his hand on the door handle, then he took it away. Augie looked down at the table. At 5 minutes to 1 in the morning, he told me to drive. 2 hours and 40 minutes. I remember because I kept looking at the clock on the dashboard the entire time, waiting for him to tell me to open the door. Camille sat motionless. She remembered that night. She remembered asking the nurse what time it was 3 times, and she remembered that close to dawn, she had stopped asking. For 14 months, she had believed he was abroad. He had been sitting 40 meters away from her for 2 hours and 40 minutes and had never walked inside. That was the night I started keeping records, Augie said. I didn't know what I was keeping them for. I'm 60 years old. I'm not a hero, and I wasn't planning to report anyone. I only knew that one day, someone would need them. Nadia took out an evidence bag and slid it toward the memory card. Anything else, Mr. Renner? Yes. He looked up. He doesn't keep the real books on a computer. There's one ledger kept outside the system, large, bound in leather. It's inside the safe, behind the wood paneling on the east wall of the gallery office on Superior Street. Who knows the safe code? He does. Augie paused for 1 beat. And Miss Volpe. I drove her there twice after midnight. Both times, she came out carrying a rigid document case. The call came to the prepaid phone at 7 o'clock that evening from a blocked number, and the voice on the other end spoke 7 words before Camille could ask who it was. I have what you need. Come alone. Priya listened to the recording 3 times before setting her own condition, and that condition wasn't open to negotiation. Juniper remained at the Rogers Park apartment with the licensed pediatric nurse, who had been on duty since the morning of the hearing, along with a list of phone numbers taped to the refrigerator door. Camille stood beside the bassinet for 2 minutes before leaving. The baby was asleep, one hand stretched out from beneath the blanket, her fingers moving faintly with each breath. Camille pulled the blanket up to her shoulders and didn't kiss her forehead because she was afraid of waking her. Is this good for her? The question remained unchanged, and this time the answer was that staying here was better than going with her mother. The coffee shop on the corner of North Wells opened at 6 o'clock, crowded on Saturday mornings with runners stopping in, and Gianna Volpe sat at the second table from the window, both hands wrapped around a paper cup she hadn't touched. Augie sat 2 tables away with a newspaper open in front of him, not reading, his eyes fixed on the reflections in the glass. Camille pulled out the chair across from Gianna and sat down. Gianna pushed a thin, old electronic reader with a black case toward her. The reading application is fake. Go into the library, open the biography on the 2nd page, and enter 412 in the chapter field. A password box will appear. She wrote 6 letters on a paper napkin and slid it across. 4:12, Camille said. 4:12 in the morning. The time you walked out of the Cicero warehouse. Gianna's face tightened. You have the photograph. I have more than one. Gianna didn't ask who had sent them. That was the first detail Camille noted, and it told her that the woman sitting across from her was asking herself the same question. Why are you doing this? 3 days ago, he transferred a $9 million trust into the name of someone I've never heard of. Before that, I was the second beneficiary. Gianna spoke very quickly, as though she feared that if she stopped, she wouldn't be able to continue. Do you understand what that means? The Cicero warehouse access card is in my name. The internal compliance emails carry my signature. If they raid the place tomorrow, the entire structure points to one person, and that person isn't him. So this isn't remorse. It's survival. That's enough, Camille said. At least that sounds true. Gianna looked down at the coffee cup. Then she added something Camille hadn't asked. You haven't asked who sent you the recording. The cafe remained just as loud. The espresso machine hissing, spoons striking ceramic, someone laughing near the counter. Camille placed her hand on the table. You did. I did. On the night I was due. I knew your due date. I knew because he kept your appointment schedule in the company application. Gianna looked up, and there were no tears in her eyes, only the exhaustion of someone who had miscalculated a move and knew it. I needed you to hear his voice on the one night when you couldn't convince yourself that you had misunderstood. You didn't send it to save me. No, you sent it so I would. Leave. Yes. Camille remained still for 3 breaths. For the past 4 days, that question had been sitting beneath every other question in her mind. smaller and more persistent. Who pressed the button? Who chose that exact night? Now she knew, and the strange thing was that it didn't hurt her any more than she already hurt. "You gave me the truth so I would walk out of that marriage on my own," she said. "Then you discovered that you didn't possess that man. You only inherited the exact place I had just left. Not inside his house, inside the court record." Gianna didn't answer. Her hands tightened around the paper cup. Camille switched on the electronic reader. The false library appeared with 6 faded book covers. She opened the biography, entered the 4 numbers, then typed the 6 letters. A folder opened. She scrolled through it. Quarterly shipping schedules covering 3 consecutive years. A layout of the Cicero warehouse with numbered shelves. Security shift rosters. Several hundred internal messages between department heads. Screenshots of shipping invoices. Camille scrolled faster, then slowed, then stopped entirely. There were no balance sheets, no transfer orders. Not a single line connecting a sum of money to a name. She looked up. "You gave me the shell. That's everything I could get. This is everything you were legitimately allowed to access." Camille turned the screen toward Gianna. "Every file here falls within the normal duties of a gallery director. You didn't steal a single thing. You only downloaded exactly what you were permitted to open, which means he never allowed you to see the part that truly mattered. I went into the safe twice. You went into the safe and carried out the document case he wanted you to carry out." Gianna opened her mouth, then closed it, and Camille saw the moment the woman understood what she had just heard. That brief instant when someone realized that for 2 years she had believed she was standing inside, when in truth she had remained outside the door. "Then where is it?" Gianna asked. "I don't know," Camille said, and she was telling the truth. "But I know where it isn't." She picked up the electronic reader and was about to place it in her bag when she lifted her head and her eyes passed over the window. Across the street, a gray sedan had just switched on its headlights. Camille stared at it for 3 full seconds, and something inside her chest dropped. The car had been parked there when she arrived. She had seen it while crossing the street 40 minutes earlier. She had seen it and dismissed it because the man behind the wheel was looking down at his phone, and in her mind, a man looking at his phone was simply waiting for his wife to buy coffee. 40 minutes. No one waited 40 minutes for his wife to buy coffee without getting out of the car. A minor discrepancy. 2 tables away, Augie folded the newspaper and stood. Augie set the newspaper down on the table and said exactly 3 words as he passed them. "Use the kitchen exit." Camille stood, slipped the electronic reader inside her coat, and Gianna lunged forward to seize her wrist. "You think I told them?" "I haven't thought anything yet." Camille pulled her hand free. The woman remained seated at the table as Camille disappeared into the narrow corridor leading toward the back of the cafe. And that was the last image she saw of her, a woman clutching a cup of cold coffee in a crowded room, her face drained white. The cafe kitchen was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other. An employee stirring a pan looked up and started to say something, but Augie raised one hand, and the man fell silent. The back door opened into a narrow alley running along the row of buildings, heavy with the smell of frying oil and damp cardboard, and at the far end was the ramp leading down to the underground garage where they had left the car that morning. "How far?" "Half a block. Walk normally. Don't run." They reached the bottom of the ramp, and the moment they turned onto the first level, headlights flared from the direction of the exit, blindingly bright. A black sport utility vehicle had been parked sideways across the upward ramp, blocking it completely, its front facing inward. Augie stopped for half a step. Behind them, the sound of tires grinding against concrete echoed down the entrance, and a second vehicle rolled in, sealing off the route they had just taken. "The stairs," he said, "on the left, behind the second pillar. You're coming with me. I'll follow." He pushed her shoulder, not hard, but with enough finality to make her stumble 1 step toward the stairwell, and Camille ran. She heard car doors opening, 2 of them, almost at the same time. She heard shoes striking the concrete, heavy and unhurried. She heard Augie say something short that she couldn't make out. Then the rhythm of the footsteps changed. Something fell. A dull impact struck the iron railing and reverberated through the entire garage. And afterward there was silence. Camille didn't look back. She climbed 1 flight of stairs, then another, one hand gripping the front of her coat where the electronic reader was hidden. At the 3rd floor landing, she threw herself against the emergency exit door, and it didn't move. She pushed the horizontal bar. Nothing. She pulled the emergency release on the side, the mechanism that regulations required to open from the inside, and nothing happened. Below her, 3 floors down, a door closed. The phone in her pocket vibrated. A message from a blocked number. "I'm sorry. My phone was compromised before this. I didn't know." Camille read the words and leaned back against the locked door. Gianna hadn't betrayed her. Gianna had been released as bait to lead her here, and she too had only just understood that, at the exact moment, it had become too late to help anyone. Camille stood still and listened. No footsteps were coming up the stairs. She waited another 30 seconds, then went back down. Augie was lying on his side on the concrete beside a support pillar, about 4 meters from where he had been standing. He was conscious. His eyes were open, and when he saw her, he raised the phone in his left hand a few centimeters above the floor. "Record this," he said, his voice rough but clear. "First vehicle, New Jersey plates, last 4 digits, 3729. Second vehicle, Illinois plates, 2148. The passenger in the second vehicle was Merrick. Don't talk anymore. Do you remember? 3729, 2148, Marek. Good." He lowered his hand. Camille knelt beside him and took out her phone. Her finger paused over the keypad for exactly 1 beat. For the past 4 days, everything she had done had been built on a single principle. Leave no trace. Don't turn on the phone. Don't use a card. Don't say her own name. Priya had told her plainly that the question wasn't whether the police were decent, but that Camille didn't know who wasn't. Calling this number meant that within 4 minutes, a patrol car would know exactly where she was, and within an hour, someone else would know too. She dialed 911. "Emergency services. What is your emergency?" "My name is Camille Ashford," she said, clearly, 1 letter at a time. "Ashford. I'm on the first level of a parking garage on North Wells, halfway down the block north of the corner cafe. My friend was attacked. He's conscious and able to speak. The 2 vehicles involved have left, and I have the plate numbers for both." She read the final 4 digits of each vehicle slowly and waited for the dispatcher to repeat them back. She gave Merrick's name as well. She clearly stated that an emergency exit door on the 3rd floor had been disabled and asked that it be entered into the record. She clearly gave the time displayed on her phone. She didn't trust the police. She hadn't trusted them since Priya had shown her the 2 charitable funds and the 3 occasions when vehicles had been provided free of charge. But she understood something else. Something 6 years of reading certificates had taught her more clearly than anything. An emergency call wasn't merely a plea for help. It was a record. It carried a call identification number, the coordinates of the cellular tower, an audio file stored on a city server, the caller's name spoken distinctly in her own voice, and all of it received a timestamp the instant the words left her mouth. Raphael could buy people. Raphael could erase company servers, burn papers inside a safe, replace records at a private clinic, but he couldn't erase a 911 call already stored inside the Chicago Fire Department system with its timestamp permanently embedded. For 4 days, she had been running from every system he knew how to touch. This was the first system he couldn't reach, and the only way to use it was to step into the light and say her name. From that moment forward, Camille Ashford stopped hiding. Sirens echoed down the ramp 7 minutes later. The paramedics cut open Augie's sleeve and attached sensor pads to his chest. One of them pointed toward his wrist. "Are you wearing a smartwatch?" "Yes," Augie said. "The little treacherous thing." Camille looked at the small screen on his wrist, where a heart rate graph showed 1 sharp spike before dropping straight down, and beside that spike were the hour, minute, and second. "It just preserved the exact time," she said. He closed his eyes, and one corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then I forgive it." It took the prosecutor's technical specialist 40 minutes to tell them the worst of it. The electronic reader had connected to the parking garage signal for approximately 50 seconds, long enough for a remote deletion command to complete. The false reading application has a self-destruct mechanism. It only needs to touch a network once. He turned the screen toward Camille and showed her the list of remaining files. Half the shipping schedules were gone. The warehouse layout was intact. Nearly all the internal messages had disappeared. We can still recover part of it from memory sectors that haven't been overwritten, but that will take several weeks. Nadia Ilves closed the case file. "We don't have several weeks. We have 4 days before he knows how closely we're looking at him." But the search warrant had already been signed the previous evening. Immediately after the 911 call entered the system with Camille Ashford's name spoken clearly, letter by letter, and both license plate numbers read aloud, digit by digit. At 5:30 in the morning, the teams entered all 3 locations simultaneously. At the gallery on Superior Street, they removed the wood paneling from the east wall and found the safe exactly where Augie had described it. It was empty. No papers, no ledger, not even a scrap. The metal wastebasket beside the desk still held scorch marks, and ash packed tightly against the bottom. At the Cicero warehouse, they found cash sealed inside art shipping crates, duplicate invoices hidden behind a partition wall, and a server room registered to a company that sold restaurant furniture. In the incinerator behind the warehouse, a technician recovered the leather cover of a large ledger, warped and blackened along 3 edges, with only 9 unreadable pages remaining inside. Nadia held the cover between 2 gloved fingers and placed it on the table in the conference room at 6 o'clock that evening. He burned it 3 days before the arrest, the same day he transferred the trust into a name we still haven't been able to identify. There were 9 people in the room, and no one spoke. Priya looked at Camille. Without the ledger, what do we have? We have the testimony of a driver who admitted transporting cash 14 times, Nadia said. Opposing counsel will stand up and argue that he's saying it to reduce his own sentence. Camille didn't join the discussion. She sat at the head of the table with one hand resting on the burned leather cover, thinking about something entirely different. She was thinking about the question Gianna had asked in the coffee shop, "Then where is it?" And she was thinking about the answer she herself had given. "I know where it isn't." Close to midnight, she stood. "I need a car to the South Loop archive, and someone authorized to sign for the records. Basement level, row G, boxes marked with my code." At 2 o'clock in the morning, 11 cardboard boxes were rolled into the conference room on a cart. Camille cut the tape, removed 21 blue folders, and spread them across the long table. She hadn't touched them in 3 years. She sat down, pulled the first file toward herself, and began to read. No one understood what she was looking for. Nadia stood against the wall with her arms folded, waiting. By the 4th file, Camille picked up a pen and began writing on a blank sheet of paper. By the 7th, she stood and started rearranging the files into a different order. At 3:20, she spoke. It was never hidden anywhere. What wasn't? The books. She turned the 9th file around and placed one finger on the ownership history. A provenance certificate for a painting contains 4 sections: the list of prior owners over time, the list of exhibitions where the work appeared, with the year, the customs declaration number from every time the work crossed a border, and the storage code. She placed 3 files side by side. "Look here, this painting has 4 previous owners, all private companies in Luxembourg, Panama, and Delaware. I checked 3 of those names at the time. They were all legally registered, so I let it pass. Looking again now, all 4 were incorporated in the same month, through the same law firm, and none of them owns any asset other than one painting. Shell companies, 4 shell companies. Then the exhibition section. This one lists 3 exhibitions in 3 different years. I just called 2 museums on the list. Neither held an exhibition by that name in the year stated." Camille pushed her notes into the center of the table, but the dates listed under the exhibitions matched the transfer dates in Mr. Renner's travel logs exactly. Every single one. And the customs declaration numbers aren't customs numbers. They don't match the required format. The first 7 digits are the amount of money. The last 3 are the recipient code. The room remained silent long enough for everyone to hear the air conditioner. Nadia stepped closer to the table. "You're telling me these 21 files are the ledger?" "I'm telling you he never hid the books anywhere," Camille said. "He hung them on the walls and sold tickets for people to come look at them." She sat down, and her voice had gone hoarse. To read this, a person would need to understand provenance certificate formats, know how to trace companies registered in 3 different jurisdictions, and know the gallery's internal storage coding system. There are 4 people in the world who can do that. 3 are on his payroll. Priya completed the sentence. The 4th is his wife. At 4 o'clock in the morning, the forensic signature report arrived. The specialist read it aloud. Of the 21 signatures on the reverse sides, 20 had been applied digitally from a company computer registered in Gianna Volpe's name, including 7 signatures applied during the exact period when Camille was in labor. He paused. "File number 9 is different. That signature was made by hand, in ink. Comparison with Mrs. Ashford's verified signature samples shows a match. No one looked at Camille. That was the worst part. The way all 9 people in the room avoided looking at her at the same time. She sat very straight and felt the past 3 years collapse into a single second. That April afternoon, the stack of papers on her desk, Raphael's voice telling her to just sign and finish it, and she had signed. "Is there a scan of the reverse side of file number 9? Camille asked. The specialist pressed several keys. The scanned image appeared on the projector, enlarged and in high resolution. The signature was in the center, and along the left margin, faintly written in pencil, small and slanted, were the words of someone making a note for herself, rather than for anyone else. Ownership chain from 74 to 81 doesn't match. Request original customs records. Everyone in the room read the line at the same time. Camille stared at it and couldn't speak for a long while. For 3 years, what had shamed her most wasn't that she had signed. It was that she had seen the problem, asked about it, and then gone silent. That unfinished question had become the darkest place inside her, the thing she carried every time she thought about who she was. Now it stood on a screen 2 meters high, written in her own hand 3 years earlier, impossible to forge, impossible to apply from anyone else's computer. Nadia Ilvez studied the penciled note for a long time, then turned to the specialist. "Enter it into the record." The signer raised a written objection on the document itself, before the document was submitted. Then she looked at Camille, and for the first time in 3 interviews, her voice changed. "You did ask, Mrs. Ashford. You simply weren't given an answer." The glass partition between the 2 interrogation rooms was nearly 3 centimeters thick, and through it, for the first time in 5 months, Camille saw her husband. Raphael was thinner. His hair was longer than he had ever allowed anyone to see it. His suit had been replaced by the gray jacket of the detention center, but the way he sat hadn't changed at all. His back straight, both hands resting parallel on the table, like a man waiting for a meeting to begin, who already knew exactly what he intended to say. Sterling Vance sat to his left. Nadia Ilvez switched on the recorder and pushed it into the center of the table. Raphael spoke first, and he spoke to Camille, not to anyone else. "Those 21 files carry your signature. 20 of them carry digital signatures applied from Miss Volpe's computer. File number 9 doesn't." He leaned slightly forward, and his voice remained as gentle as ever, the voice he used to remind the person across from him that they were mistaken. "You signed it in ink, at your own desk, on an afternoon in April. Do you think people will forget that simply because you cried in front of a judge?" Camille didn't answer. Priya reached toward her wrist, then drew her hand back because there was no longer any need. For 6 years, every silence Raphael created had been a pit already dug for Camille to fall into, and she had fallen into it thousands of times with explanations, apologies, and quiet yeses that grew softer each time. Now she sat still, and allowed the pit to remain empty. Nadia opened the case file, removed an enlarged scan, and slid it across the steel table, turning it so Vance could read it. The reverse side of file number 9. The pencil notation has been examined, and both the handwriting and the age of the graphite match the date of the signature. Before the document was submitted, the signer raised a written objection concerning the chain of ownership from 74 to 81 and requested the original customs records. She placed another sheet on the table. "And here are 7 digital signatures applied while Mrs. Ashford was in labor at Northwestern Hospital. Please explain how a woman giving birth could sign documents in an office 7 kilometers away." Vance touched his client's sleeve. "Don't answer that." But Raphael had lowered his eyes to the paper, and Camille saw something she had never seen during all the years they had lived together. His composure cracked. It didn't shatter. It only cracked along one thin line, like porcelain glaze meeting hot water. "She set me up." Nadia didn't move. She allowed the sentence to remain between them for 3 seconds before speaking. "You have just confirmed that, Miss." Volpe had access to the transfer structure. Raphael turned toward the recorder with its glowing red light, and he understood what he had done. And he knew that he had understood too late. In Camille's profession, what had just happened was called a minor discrepancy. This time, it wasn't hers. But several minutes earlier, while Vance was still arranging his papers, Raphael had said something else. He had looked directly at Camille through the glass and told her that he had never ordered anyone to hurt her. Camille had heard him, and she hadn't believed a single word. 6 weeks later, The investigation proved that it was the only true statement he had made throughout the entire story. Merrick's phone data led to a prepaid number. That number led to a payment account, and that account was registered in the name of Bruno Sartori's wife. Bruno had acted alone. He was the one who ordered men to block both ends of the parking garage that Saturday morning. He was the one who stood on the third floor of the building across from the hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning and photographed Camille curled up on the stone bench. He was the one who paid $18,000 to a woman 7 centimeters taller than Camille to strap on a false pregnancy belly, walk into the River North Clinic, and sign Camille's name on the consent form. And he was the one who anonymously sent the photograph of Gianna outside the Cicero warehouse, not to help Camille discover the truth, but to force her out of hiding and into a coffee shop on North Wells. His calculation had been cold and precise. If Camille were permanently silenced, the 21 provenance certificates would retain their legal value. Raphael would still go to prison for other crimes, and the entire operation would pass into the hands of the last man standing, without anyone tracing where it had gone. The man who believed he was controlling the pieces had turned out to be the piece pushed forward first. The supervised visitation took place on an afternoon in April. The room had 4 plastic chairs, a camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, and a wall clock that ticked louder than necessary. Before Raphael entered, the officers collected his phone, his belt, and his expensive wristwatch. Camille quietly told Priya that someone was finally taking inventory of his possessions before allowing him into a room, and Priya had to raise a hand to cover her mouth. A small wooden horse sat on the table. Juniper rested in her mother's lap, 8 months old, and she didn't look at the wooden horse even once. She stared at the yellow identification card hanging from the female supervisor's neck, which flashed whenever the woman leaned down to write, then reached for the pen with the solemn concentration of someone attending to a matter of great importance. Everyone in the room laughed. A strip of afternoon sunlight slipped through the blinds and fell across her feet, and the baby kicked at the light and laughed loudly for a long time, her laughter filling the room with its 4 plastic chairs and making the clock on the wall suddenly seem much quieter. Raphael sat still, watching his daughter laugh. "Come home," he said, "when all of this is over. There's no home left to return to. The apartment still belongs to us. It was seized. I can fix that. You can't fix a criminal case from a visitation room." He waited. He released a long silence, the exact kind she had rushed to fill for 6 years. This time, she remained still with one hand supporting her daughter's back, and the silence stayed between them until he was the one forced to speak first. It was the first time in her life that she defeated him without saying a word. 3 weeks later, Raphael Castellane pleaded guilty to charges of financial conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and falsifying corporate records. The federal court sentenced him to 14 years in prison. Bruno Sartori received the harshest sentence in the entire case. Gianna Volpe received a reduced sentence after surrendering every message, password, and device. But she lost her professional license and was prohibited from holding a corporate management position for 10 years, and on the day of sentencing, she didn't look toward Camille even once. Augustin Renner testified for 2 full days, admitting every trip, every delivery of cash, and every order he knew was wrong but followed anyway. His cooperation reduced his punishment, but it didn't erase what he had done. He received probation, community service, and a permanent ban from all licensed security work. The transportation company and the gallery chain were placed under independent administration. Legitimate employees kept their jobs, the shell companies were dissolved, and assets purchased with criminal proceeds were seized. 4 months later, investigators identified the beneficiary hidden behind the unfamiliar name in the $9 million trust records. Nadia called Camille and began by saying that she was sorry to be the person delivering the news. The beneficiary was Juniper Ashford. Raphael had transferred the trust into his daughter's name 3 days before his arrest. On the same day, he burned the leather-bound ledger inside the metal wastebasket beside his desk. He hadn't done it out of love for his child. Money placed in a child's name was something no one wanted to touch, and he had 14 years to sit and wait for that child to grow up. The trust was frozen because it had been created with proceeds from criminal activity. Camille had the right to challenge the decision on her daughter's behalf, pursue the case for 4 to 6 years, and had a genuine chance of winning. She sat in the conference room with the document before her for 20 minutes, then signed a waiver, giving up the right to appeal, and requested that the entire amount be transferred into a restitution fund for the artists and suppliers who had gone unpaid for 6 years. Priya asked whether she was certain, then asked a second time, and then a third. She'll have many things, Camille said, but she won't have a single chain. 9 months after the night she gave birth alone, Camille opened a small appraisal office in Andersonville. 2 rooms, 1 glass window overlooking the street, and not a single interior door with a lock. One afternoon in September, she pushed the stroller along a path in Lincoln Park and saw Augie waiting on a bench with one hand resting on a cane. He moved more slowly than before, but his eyes were clearer. He handed her an envelope. Inside was the hospital identification card, the one she had placed face down on the table during the first night and believed had been lost long ago. He had found it in the side compartment of the hospital bag before handing the bag over to federal investigators. The space reserved for the father's name was still blank. I thought I had lost this. You lost enough that night. Camille looked at him. You also helped us get out. A late attempt to make things right, he said, but it still counts. He touched 2 fingers to Juniper's tiny shoe, then stood and stepped back. Camille didn't ask him to stay, and he didn't wait to be invited. They both understood that forgiveness didn't erase what had happened. It only allowed 2 people to stop carrying it every day. There was a cardboard box outside the door of the new apartment. Camille froze for exactly half a second, and that half second would remain with her for years. Then she bent down and read the label. Diapers. Ordered by Priya. She laughed alone in the hallway, unlocked the door, and carried her daughter inside. She placed the hospital card in a wooden box on the shelf beside the ownership deed for the apartment, a document bearing only one name with no line reserved for a joint owner. One object marked the night someone had tried to take away her right to decide the course of her own life. The other proved that they had failed. No one was standing outside the door. No vehicle was waiting on the street below. When the lock clicked into place, the silence inside that home belonged to her. There are things in life we never get to choose. No one chooses the person who will betray them, the night that person will do it, or how long the pain will last. But one thing always remains ours, and that is what we do next. Camille couldn't change who Raphael was, and she couldn't erase the night he left her alone. She could only decide what happened afterward, and she chose to protect her child, pursue the truth to its very end, accept an outstretched hand even when it came late, and stop allowing fear to speak the final word. Losing control of a situation doesn't mean losing control of yourself, and sometimes the unfinished question we once abandoned, the very thing that made us most ashamed of ourselves, becomes the thing that saves us later. If Camille's story touched you in some way, leave one word in the comments. Worthy. Write it for someone who is listening in silence and wondering whether they still have enough strength to stand again. We would truly love to know how this story made you feel, which moment made you pause the longest, and which character remained in your heart. Please share your honest thoughts below, because every comment you leave is read and received with all our hearts. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone you believe needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the compelling stories we bring you every day. May you and your family always be blessed with good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.